So I jumped out of a plane at 17 because I wanted to go to Australia. I lived in Africa and Nigeria when I was 8, and lived in South Carolina.
That's crazy.
I went to university in North Carolina, and I went to Singapore at the age of 27 to start my first business, and went to China at the age of 40 to start, another one. And I opened a business in India. So I come back to the UK. So
That's ridiculous.
we're all given the most amazing gift in the world, which is life. If you don't challenge yourself, you don't get better. And what happens is, if you don't get better, you become uncompetitive.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Breakthrough Blueprint. I'm Rohan, and I'm joined here today by Jim James, who's an entrepreneur of many projects, with one being a project that helps other entrepreneurs share their stories on his podcast, The Unnoticed Entrepreneur. And as you can see, he's wearing the merchandise right now, which I'm going to have to buy sometime. But thank you so much, man, for coming on the show. Seriously, I really, really appreciate it.
Rohan, thanks for reaching out. It's a pleasure to join you. Thank you so much.
So the one thing I want to start with is that when I first looked at your LinkedIn, you and I both know the thing that grabbed my attention first was the fact that you said you jumped out of a plane when you were 17, or something happened when you were 17 years old. I'm just gonna let you talk because I want to hear what the story is about.
Okay, well, I'm glad. I mean, that's an example there of what my LinkedIn coach Simon Chapazo talks about, which is really having a story. So using your LinkedIn profile not as a CV, but as a way to build your personal brand. So I jumped out of a plane at 17 because I wanted to go to Australia. I'm in England, as you've mentioned, and I won a place on a trip called Operation Rally, which is a 3-month expedition to the outback of Northern Australia. Yeah, which would be terrific.
They have like crazy stuff there. They have like a bunch of random spiders, a bunch of snakes, a bunch of just crazy stuff there.
They have more things that can kill you than people, really. And that's why the people that live there drink more beer than the number of reptiles and insects they've got.
So put it past them.
Yeah, so I won this. I said enter to get into this trip, but I realized that if I had to work by the hour to pay to go on this trip, I would run out of time, Rohan, right? And this is this terrible dilemma for people, that are maybe in a year off, in a gap year, is that you've got only maybe a year. The bigger your ambition, the more money you need. And if you work by the hour, the more time it's going to take, right? It's kind of a cruel equation. It occurred to me while I was selling toys in this department store that I had to do something a little bit different. I don't know why.
Was it like a Toys R Us type of thing?
Yes, it was that kind of store. So I was there, actually it was great fun. I could play with all the toys I never got as a boy, but it occurred to me that I had to do something. And so I decided I would do something that other people would think was a little bit kind of scary and adventurous, because it was only by doing something that other people wouldn't do themselves that I would get sponsored. Cycle rides, walks. It's nothing wrong with those, but everyone does them. So I decided I would jump out of an airplane. And then I told everybody this is what I was going to do. I went around with my sponsorship forms and I raised £1,000 for jumping out of the airplane that afternoon.
That's sick. Wow.
And this is back in 1984, 85.
Was skydiving popular back then, or was it like, what was
not really? This is pre-Red Bull, right? I mean, this is this is a long time ago, right? So people, I mean, we still had propellers and everything. We weren't sort of hang gliders, and the Wright brothers had long since passed, so it wasn't quite that generation. But it was not a very common thing to do, but there were a few people that were doing it. So I took a course and jumped out. But what I really learned at that venture was that it was possible to create something out of nothing. It was possible to create an idea and package that idea and sell it to other people and get them involved in that idea. And what I then did, Rohan, was I took that money and I went to a local shop in Canterbury, Kent, where I'm from, and said, look, I've just jumped out of an airplane. I got sponsored. I'm going to Australia. I need all this equipment. but if I buy this equipment from you, how about we do a deal where
Hmm.
you give me a discount or you give me the stuff for free and I'll get you media coverage. I'll get you into the local newspaper called the Kentish
Yeah.
Gazette.
So was it like
And
it's like an older version of social media marketing where you're like, it's a very big marketing stunt in a way.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And I don't really know where I got the chutzpah from this, but if in the article the journalist wrote saying, I walked into this newspaper um, reception and said, I've got a story for you.
Hmm.
And I said, I'm going to do this jump. And this local company called Field and Trek agreed to give me equipment, backpack, shoes, stuff like that. And I took pictures then with the local town newspaper photographer in the store.
Hmm.
So at the end of a couple of months, I managed to raise money. And then as a result of raising money in the sponsorship, another company, a big computer company, put in another £1,000. So
Whoa, making bank now all this off that skydiving thing, I guess.
exactly, Rand.
I,
So
was that because the fact that you were 17 and doing that, was that more of a sport for like the daredevils of the world, or like when you were jumping out of a plane at 17, was that like what did people consider that? Did people consider you to be like a daredevil? Did people consider you just be stupid,
yeah,
like
just
crazy?
foolish.
What they could full of
Just
it, full
foolish
of it?
because I
Okay.
mean, bear in mind, back in those days, people were not on and off planes very often, right? We just
Yeah.
had the beginnings of Laker Airways, but there was no Virgin Airlines. People would maybe go on an airplane if they flew for business,
Okay.
and if you did get an airplane, you planned on landing in the same one, right? You didn't plan on getting out halfway
Yeah.
at 2,000 feet.
I
So,
think most
it's sort
people
of,
nowadays still think that.
yeah, no, and I was afraid of heights as well, Rohan. So I also did this to challenge myself,
Mhm.
because I was the kid who on Empire State Building wouldn't look over the edge, right? When we
Oh
went
my
there,
God, yeah.
you know,
That's kind of my mom too. I mean, have you ever been to the Burj Khalifa? I mean, you're from the UK, so you're closer than I am at least. Have you ever been there?
to where? Sorry.
The Burj Khalifa in Dubai, like the tallest building.
Yes, I have. Yes.
And did you look
Yep.
down when you were on the floor?
Well, actually, I didn't go up there, but in KLCC in Kuala Lumpur, which
Okay.
is I was based in Southeast Asia for 13 years, before moving to Beijing. Um, and the KLCC, they have an observation deck, like on the
Hmm.
38th or something, mad floor. And you go
Yeah,
up there, and I mean, you could look all the way over it's called the Klang Valley. It's amazing.
that's really
Um,
cool.
but I'm still not like a massive one for heights. I still hate it. But I think in the context of this blueprint concept that you have for the show, which I think is brilliant, I suppose the takeaway, if you like, for anyone listening to this, is that it's possible to create something from nothing, and
Yeah.
that you can create something from nothing and package it. And if you can get one person to believe in it, that creates a credibility, what you'd now call social proof, but in those days we didn't think in those terms. But once you've got one person to believe in it, and then you can say that person believes in it, so can you,
Yeah.
right? And you get a multiplier effect. So so this idea of doing something out of your own comfort zone, because then you learn yourself as well, but also then you can say to people, hey, what, I'm going to do something that challenges me.
Hmm.
So why not support that? Because actually what happens, Rohan, is people live vicariously through other people, right?
Yeah.
People go, wow, I've always wanted to jump out of a plane, but I never could. Afraid, didn't have the time, whatever.
Yeah.
So what I then did was I took pictures, and you see on my website at jimajames.com a picture of me jumping out of the aeroplane. My daughters still don't believe it's me um, doing it, but you can build a story,
Yeah. You
and you
definitely
can
can.
see now, what am I now? So I was 18 when I did that. Now I'm 56, so nearly 30 years later, I'm using that story and it's brought us together.
It
So,
has.
so that's maybe sort of a little bit of a blueprint.
So was your goal back then to kind of you seem to always be wanting to help other people. I mean, even with the podcast that you run, you want to give entrepreneurs that don't have a big enough platform to get their name out there. Was your goal back in 17, 18? Was it to like, I don't know, get those discounts on the products that you wanted, or was it more so to help people learn that their fears are just a figment of their imagination, that the limitations they place on themselves are like most likely self-imposed? Was that more so the goal, or was it more just to like get some free chips or something like that?
Yeah, I'd love to say that I was, on a mission from God to help others, but at the
Yeah,
time,
a
I
little
was on a,
ambitious.
I was on a mission to help myself get to Australia. But what was the case was that Operation Rally, which actually still exists, was an organization where you would go and serve in a community. In this particular case, I went to Australia. So what we were doing
Okay.
was,
Oh, I
we,
forgot. Yeah, it was the Operation Rallies. Okay.
yeah. So if you like, I wanted to spend part of my year out doing something where it was of value to others.
Hmm.
And yeah, that's kind of you to call that out. But as a recurring theme, I find that extremely nourishing, for the soul. And I guess at an early age, I didn't understand that necessarily, but it
Hmm.
was definitely part of the way that I was brought up, and part of the view that I've still got, that we should find some place or somewhere, and we should make it better than when we arrived. And
Hmm.
that's certainly what we did in Australia. We built pathways, we built water for Aboriginals so they could get fresh water in the outback, for example. So that we could let other people know that they can do more than they thought they could
Hmm.
later on in life. I think later on in life, you realize that a lot of people have limiting beliefs, but when you're young, you don't really think other people have got limiting beliefs. You're not that aware, really. You're just kind of all trying to do stuff, and then later on in life, you realize some people haven't done things,
Yeah.
and some people have, and then you start to ask yourself why that is, and then is there a way that you can support others so they can
Yeah.
overcome those?
Like I mean, for example, most of the audience that I guess I pertain to are young people. And you being very young, 17, 18, and doing these outlandish stunts, you must have faced some sort of rejection or denial or some sort of imposter syndrome or some sort of like self-doubt, whether that's imposed from other people or by yourself. I mean, how did you handle that? Because you're so young, you're doing something that's very, very difficult, something that's very ambitious in a way. How did you take the rejection that you probably face or the denial that you face? Like, how did you really handle that, or how did you approach it?
It's a really good question. I know that people now are really thinking about imposter syndrome, but I have to confess, at the time, Rohan, I just believed that what I was doing was right, and
Hmm.
I hadn't really experienced failure yet at that age.
Oh, so you like, did you have this kind of belief where I'm just winning, I'm winning, I'm winning, like everything I'm
Well,
doing must just be
it
correct?
was it was less that I'm winning, I'm winning, I'm winning. It was more that I haven't failed yet.
Hmm.
So there's a slight distinction there, because I hadn't really at 17 done much outside of the norm, in terms of uh, society. I'd gone to school. I'd been in my parents. We'd lived in as a kid. I was, living in Africa and in America, and then back in the UK. Right. So
Hmm.
I'd lived a little bit in different places, but I didn't really have a sense that I was accomplishing very much, and nor did I feel that I couldn't accomplish anything.
Yeah,
So it was more, I think, that the potential upside of what I was doing was so overwhelming, if you like. I was in love with what I was trying to accomplish.
yeah,
When yeah, people said, you can't raise the money, or you won't go on this trip, um, I just didn't believe them. you know
yeah.
and I think that, for anyone listening to this that suffers from imposter syndrome, I'm going to say that if you suffer from that at 18, you're being really unfair on yourself,
Hmm.
because you have so much potential, and the world is so forgiving, and there is so much time to try and to fail and to rinse and repeat, that I'd really encourage anyone that might be struggling with that to say, just just don't let that get in the way. I know it's
Yeah,
easy to say that, but um, you have so little risk, because when you're young, you can do things. You have so much time to recover. emotionally,
Yeah.
financially. You have so much time to recover. So my encouragement is just to try, because it's actually in the trying and the learning that we get better and learn again anyway. So
Yeah, I think nowadays I think with the advancement of social media, failing is very much stigmatized, and people kind of don't even try because they're very scared of failure. And one thing that, I mean, even with this podcast idea, right, it was very, very difficult to start it because you think about, like, I imagine with you as well, like, you think about the potential criticism you get, the judgment you receive from peers, maybe, or what if I don't get any listeners or any viewers or whatnot. But I mean, one thing that I kept telling myself is just that I mean, I'm not gonna live for other people's happiness or for other people's enjoyment. I'm just gonna do what I want to do and just let the wave ride. I'm not sure if you had any sort of similar thought pattern, but for me, I just kind of wanted to see how far I could push it, how far I could really go. And I mean, I'm 18, so I'm seriously, seriously young with this type of stuff. And you're so right about the like you're so when you said that, I was thinking in my head, he's so right. Because when you start so young, you have so much like such a big safety net because you're not living by yourself. You're in college most likely. You have so much you can do. So I don't just why not just try? But I kind of want to pivot towards where I did not even know that you used to live in all these places: America, UK, Australia, China. I'm imagining somewhere else in like India, maybe you've probably gone to India at some point, or Russia, or
yeah,
whatever, wherever. Like you've been
yeah.
all over the world. And I think that provides you with a really interesting lens on society in general, the problems that we face. Um, what do you think is what do you think was the biggest takeaway after visiting all these countries in your life? Like, what was the biggest takeaway? Like, what were some of the biggest differences you saw within all these countries?
Okay, so yeah, thank you. That's an interesting sort of perspective to look at. So yeah, I've been lucky. I lived in Africa and Nigeria when I was 8. And lived in South Carolina.
That's crazy.
I went to university in North Carolina, and I went to Singapore at the age of 27 to start my first business, and went to China at the age of 40 to start, another one. And I opened a business in India. So and I come back to the UK. So
That's
um,
actually that's ridiculous. That's
yeah,
ridiculous.
it's kind of an odyssey, really, right? And so I guess in that sense, I have a vantage point that, if anyone's listening. And I think actually there are a couple of points. One is that there are some universal truths about people. So you've asked about the differences, but I think we also have to look at the similarities, Rohan,
Yeah,
because
definitely.
if you look at the similarities, it makes it all a little less scary. And part of the luxury that I've had is to, travel around the world and build businesses where I wanted to live, right? And I've
Hmm.
also traveled through Central America, where I also raised money by actually getting some sponsorship and designing t-shirts, selling the t-shirts to
Yeah.
people and stuff like that, right? So
Oh wait, that's what you did.
yeah, yeah. So I did that when I was a student in Chapel Hill.
That's kind of smart though. That's really smart.
Yeah, it's great. I sold t-shirts at sororities, and that was probably one of the more nerve-wracking things I've ever
That's
done in my life.
wait, so did you used to buy like fake Supreme or like fake luxury brands and just like and just sell them?
No, no, no. I designed t-shirts.
Oh, okay. My fault. I
No,
thought
no,
this
no.
was
I designed my own this is before the internet, so we didn't have drop shipping or anything. No,
oh,
no.
okay.
I designed my own t-shirts
That's
and,
smart
and
too. That's a really nice business. Yeah.
yeah, and raised money from a local person in North Carolina and paid the t-shirts for free. And then I sold the t-shirts and made a couple of thousand US dollars for that
Just a
trip.
couple thousand here.
Yeah, so, and I'll tell you about my book that I've just written about how to explain how to do this. But so I think you asked the question, just to recap, because the editing I was being miserable for you. The question was differences around the world, and I guess what I'd love to say first of all is that we need to think about the commonalities, the
Yeah,
similarities around the
definitely.
world, because human nature is that whether it's people in China or Singapore, Australia, where I've been, or Latin America, America, continental Europe, you know, everybody wants to be loved. Everyone wants to be fed. Everyone wants to feel secure. Everyone wants to have recognition, right? There are some essential human requirements that we all live with, right?
Yeah.
What differs is how we all believe we're going to get those. and to some degree the priority of each of those things. So, in certain societies, we talk about in the West, we're driven by guilt. And in Asia, people are driven by shame.
Really. So, I mean, because I think I'm using, I guess, the idea of education, because in the Western society, there's guilt associated with not getting into Harvard or getting to Stanford, because of some sort of reason. But in Asia, I know that it's extremely so cutthroat there that Chinese students are like working 24/7 to get into those schools. And if they don't, then their parents are very shameful. They're very shameful. Like it's that kind of dynamic of if
Yeah.
I don't do this, I'm a failure because that's what society tells them.
Yeah, and this comes down, the root cause of this is religion, right? Because in the West, in Christian-based societies, we have a belief in judgment, right? And we have a belief that God is watching. But in Buddhist and Taoist societies and Confucian societies of Asia, that deity doesn't exist, right? It's about what you have inside and about the family unit being the building block of
Yeah,
society,
we learned
right?
that like we learned about Confucianism in that in my Mandarin class, definitely.
Yeah, so our societies, and obviously in Africa, there's a tribal and a spiritual dimension, which is different
Yeah.
again, right? So each society is addressing the human condition from different perspectives. And that's where we then get the outgrowths, because civil society, politics, culture, religion, commerce, and so on, these are manifestations of the spiritual
Hmm.
fundamentals of society. So differences, you're absolutely right. They manifest themselves, and as an entrepreneur, how you do marketing in those different societies is different. When you go and live in them, they're different. And I think that part of the joy that we have as people, and part of your generation have now, is that you can participate in these different societies in a way that's much, much more accessible than it
Yeah, you
was,
definitely
when
can.
so when I went to Singapore in 95, we didn't have the internet, right? We didn't have mobile phones. When you left, you left, right? And you'd send a postcard. It would take a week to 10 days to get back to England, right?
So
And I used
different
to,
now. It's insane because you could really just post anything and it could get into the hands of someone in Singapore and like wherever. It could be wherever.
it could be global, right? So it could be global instantly, right? Whereas I used to ring my grandmother from Singapore, and she'd say, "You are clever, it's such a long way away."
Hmm.
Right. And of course, now we know that you can put a tweet or an Insta or whatever out, and
Yeah.
it's global, right? So your generation as well has international travel, you have international banking, you have now apps that do simultaneous translation on your mobile phone, right? So
Yeah.
so many of the barriers that we had when I grew up, at 18 going to places,
Yeah.
your generation doesn't have, right? So it's going to be very interesting to see how many of your generation then embrace that opportunity,
How would you
because
embrace this opportunity if you were in my position in a way, where you're first starting out your companies, your businesses, whatnot, whatnot? How would you take advantage of this opportunity that we all have? Because I think we underestimate it and we use this global network not to its fullest potential in any sort of manner. We very much stay focused on the domestic, who's in our local region, who's in our state. I guess with video games, and for example, like you could realistically be playing with someone from anywhere in the world, but that's very much an opportunity that's not taken advantage of. I don't personally play video games, but I'm just saying in general. How would you now take this opportunity that we're all given, knowing that what you know now? Like, how would you go about this?
yeah, I think actually, Ron, I'd say that I would do the same thing regardless of the technology landscape.
So
You
you'd
know,
still be traveling all over the world just to,
because going there is really the only way you can know another society properly. And that's because what we see on a screen, I mean, you're in America and I'm in the UK, and it's amazing,
yeah.
right? With this. But, you know, I can't feel the temperature where you are. I can't smell the flowers or taste the food, and I can't
Mhm.
listen to the music, and I can't see how quickly traffic moves, or I can't see what's on the billboards, right? So
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of things that go on in society that tell us much more about an individual that are
Hmm.
not on a screen. And
Yeah, no,
because
definitely.
the screen is audio visual only and of a certain size. So, we're not getting the benefit of all the senses. And also what we're not getting is the frisson of excitement, right? When you get off a plane, and you don't know the place, and you've
There's a
got
bit
it.
of excitement as well, like because
Yeah,
you feel nervous at first, but then it's a whole new environment. The possibilities are really endless.
exactly. And what happens is you test yourself, and initially it's a little bit ropey, and you feel a bit insecure, but you have some small wins. You find a place to stay, you navigate the first menu, you have a
Yeah.
smile from somebody, right? And then at the end of the first night, second night, you go, actually, I'm more capable than I thought. And
Mhm.
so I'm a real fan, as you can see from my I guess my slightly sort of a life of odyssey really is of kind of continuing to look outside of my own comfort zone. And because it's only that way that we can push our own boundaries and our own limits. And the
Mhm.
joy of going to different cultures is that all of a sudden we have to evaluate how we address everything. Because if you're in
Yeah.
a different culture, all of a sudden you don't necessarily have the same food. You don't necessarily have the same toothpaste. You don't necessarily have the same clothing. You don't,
Yeah.
necessarily sit on a bus the same way. So all of a sudden the brain is having to start to reconfigure, right? And
Mhm.
about neuroplasticity, right? That actually, if we're in the same place doing the same thing over time, we atrophy because the brain doesn't need to work, so it stops working.
Yeah.
So you asked the question is, what would I do differently? The answer is I'd do exactly the same thing as I did, back in, 1995, which is to pack a suitcase, and to go somewhere and be
Yeah.
open to the risk that I might not keep everything that I went with. I might learn some things, I might lose some things,
Yeah.
but on balance, the experience would be enriching.
I think that's a very good take. I personally want to travel a lot when I'm older. I think there's a lot of people who don't, in a sense, just because you're right. It is very uncomfortable to go to a brand new place. I was in Florida this past week, and even there, like adjusting to the differences in food, because I cook so much at home, and going there and not being able to cook at all because we're staying in a hotel it was honestly kind of difficult. As weird as it is to say, it was difficult to do that. But one thing I'm curious about is why do you think so many people nowadays are so unwilling to step out of that comfort zone and explore those different cultures or I guess do the difficult things in life. In your opinion, why were you able to do that and why are some people unable to do that or unwilling? Maybe that's a better word.
Well, I'm not sure that the percentage has changed very much, to be honest, because, when I went to Singapore, I joined a relatively small group of expats, you know, relative to the number of people in the UK.
Okay.
So, in the UK, about 200,000 people a year leave the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
Semi-permanently. About 700,000 people arrive. And then within a few years, maybe half of those or two-thirds of those people come back again.
Mm-hmm.
So statistically, not that many people do leave and set up somewhere else. And I'm not sure whether that number's changed, to be honest, that much over time.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's also important to talk about the costs of doing that, right? So when you do go overseas and you move and you challenge yourself, you lose some things, right? So, you lose some security financially. If I'd stayed in the same town, I bought a house at the age of 26. If I'd stayed in that house and stayed in the job and stayed with the girlfriend and so on, 30 years later, my financial position would be much different, right? It may be maybe more secure, probably would be more secure, right? Um, I would have maybe been on the same team doing the same thing for 25, 30 years with people. So I may well have much deeper, long lasting relationships with people. Um, so when you do move, you cut some ties,
Yeah.
right? And so there is a risk that you're going to lose some things. And for many people, getting things is more important than the opportunity of experiencing new things. So if you've got a car and a house, for many people, that is the goal. And so the risk of losing that is, isn't worth it, because they'd rather hold on to what they've got rather
Yeah.
than think what they might get. Okay. My personal view has been, I can always buy those things, later, and maybe they'll be different.
Hmm.
But, you ask why people do it. We all have different thresholds for learning, and for risk. And in the same way that only about 5% of the population are entrepreneurs, right? 95% of people get jobs, take instructions, and have, complained probably about their boss and the commute
Yeah.
and the office and so on, but actually don't take action to do anything about it.
That's exactly that dynamic is very, very. I think since I've been reading so much more, like I started reading a bunch of books about this stuff, and it's crazy how once you're aware that it's a thing, you start looking around. It's so prevalent in so many different ways. Like you see very frequently, people do the same thing every weekend, every week, same mundane schedule. And instead of fixing it, they'd rather complain. And you mentioned that statistic of 5% people are entrepreneurs. I think they may be lower than that. I'm not sure if that statistic's even right, because I think that it'd be 3%. I would even say 3%. But one thing I'm curious about is what's the distinct, like what determines what path you go down? How do you, like, is it genetics which determines whether you go down the 5% route or the 95% route? What determines who goes into what category, whatever bid?
It's a fascinating question. My father's a professor and my mother's a social worker. And my grandfather was a banker on one side, and the other side was a Methodist minister in Africa. So I don't really come from a background of entrepreneurship. So I'm not sure that entrepreneurship is in the genes.
Mhm.
And my sisters are not entrepreneurs either. So I'm not sure that it's in the genes, whether that's good or not, good or bad news for anybody. I don't know.
I think it'd
Um,
be good news too, because if it's genetic, you can just it's an excuse then if it's genetic too.
I guess that's absolutely true, right? So people might use it as something to rely on. But I think that it's about, you know, what you want out of life, I think, Rowan. People that go through the same, what you would term as mundane, some people love the routine, right? And kids love routine. It's how you settle kids down. And when you have animals, they need a routine, right? So for many people, that routine is comforting. And I think that's fabulous. And I really wish that I had that in my makeup, because doing the same thing day in, day out means you really don't have to take many decisions, right? You don't have to take many risks. Your responsibilities are known. And I think that must be a wonderful and peaceful way to live.
But do you
I,
not think that being in that kind of that I don't want to say mundane because you're right, it's a bit derogatory, but do you not think being in a routine day in, day out, I can agree with you. For me, for example, I do the same thing pretty much every day, for the summer. And then during this, when I go back to school, take a very different approach to life. I think that routine day in, day out is good for it's a short term. I view jobs and that kind of stuff as like a short term solution to a long term problem. The long term problem being financial stability. Do you not think that, I guess, staying in that comfort zone would, instead of being peaceful, be a bit more nerve wracking and anxious? Because I living, a lot of people a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck, and being in that kind of routine produces a lot of instability. Because if some wrench just gets thrown in your whole plan, then you're like screwed. You're really screwed.
okay.
So I don't want
Yeah.
I don't want to take off your like veer off from the question, but I just want to say that.
No, I think you've got to actually an essentially important question. And one of the reasons that I personally don't believe that living in a routine daily is sustainable is
Sustainable. Yeah,
because if you don't challenge yourself, you don't get better. And what happens
definitely.
is, if you don't get better, you become uncompetitive, because the rest of the world is moving forward.
Yeah.
So in the same way that a company has to continue to innovate to stay competitive,
Hmm.
I personally believe that individuals need to continue to innovate.
Yeah.
Right? There's a parallel between the individual circumstance and the company circumstance. If a company just does the same thing day in, day out, you'd still have an old model Ford, right? Only in black, and they would still be making those cars. But people would say, well, Tesla's got an electric and it's got electric windows. Why would I
Yeah.
continue to buy that, right? So the company has to continue to innovate and take risks in doing so,
Yeah,
right? Product failures and so on. And for me, Rohan, I think you've identified really an essential part of where I come from, which is I need to continue to add value to my surroundings, or I in the end, I atrophy, right? My value fades. I become less and less competitive. So what you see is people's earning curves when they're employed, they go like, I don't know whether you can see this, but they go up.
Yeah.
And in the first decade, they go up, and then they plateau. And what you find is by the time people are in their 50s, they're actually making less money per hour in real terms.
Yeah.
And that is a function of them getting into a routine and becoming less and less competitive in those
I
early
think if
years.
they were
They're
to do
willing
a
to
curve
work.
as well of like happiness, it would be the same thing, or of satisfaction with life, where you get the new job, it's super exciting, you meet these new people, you get your education, your degree, up. You do this, you do it for however long, 20, 30 years, same thing. And then something happens or you just decide to retire. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's very similar.
So I think this idea that you have a choice, that actually you can stick to a routine and continue to be compensated on an ever increasing scale, that is fundamentally false. And society doesn't address that, right?
Do you think it's a
Society
trap?
says it's useful for society, for corporate, if you like, world, and for the political systems to have people get into a place and stay there, right? And continue to yield
Definitely, yeah.
money. Because if you work for other people, you're making other people money, right? So you
Yeah.
are basically an asset for them to squeeze,
Yeah.
right? Now, so when I was young, I hated the idea of being poor, right? We didn't have a lot
A
of
big
money as a
what?
kid, of being poor, right? I hated poverty. And I saw poverty in Africa, and at home we didn't have much money. And I thought, my dad worked for the same university for 30 years, right? And he got to he was a professor, but he never seemed to make really any more money, because actually they were like, why would we need to pay you anymore? You don't want to take any risk. You keep doing the same thing, you get the same money, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's down to. You keep turning up to the same job, the same week, every year. And at the end of that, you really haven't done any more lately than you did when you first
Yeah.
started, So fundamentally, the reason why I keep kind of breaking what I've got is because that enables me to move. And that curve that I showed, after 13 years in Singapore, I was at the stage where I go, right, this is killing me. I need to break the back of this, and yes, take some risk and losing things. But then I get to go back up that curve again. So I went to China, right? And I
Yes.
learned Chinese, and I studied several businesses, and I met my wife and had my daughters, right? So I was able to go, what? Okay. And I kind of reignite the fire and go back up the curve, right? And then after 13 years in China, I come back to England, and I sold the business in Singapore and stopped the business in China. I challenged myself with this new brand, The Unnoticed Entrepreneur, to learn a whole bunch of new skills around with the podcast. And then I made that into a book, and then I entered a competition, and we were finalists. So then a publisher approached me for the books. And today, actually, I just confirmed I'm going to do a radio show here
That's really cool.
in Wiltshire. Thank you for The Unnoticed Entrepreneur. So I'm trying at the age of 56 to reinvent myself, because that's the only way that I can move up the value curve, right? Just like a company would introduce new products to keep you paying for new features. So this idea of, if you keep living in a routine, it's great, but you can't expect to get increased returns if you're not generating increasing interest and increasing value. So that's why I keep doing this, because I don't want to ever become irrelevant, right? And so, but there's an awful time between stopping doing what you were doing and having the new thing fully formed. There's a terrible moment, months, years, weeks. So whoever's listening to this, thinking about this, Be you ready for that terrible moment where you're no longer doing what you used to do and were comfortable, and where you haven't fully formed what you are doing, because that's the choppy bit in the sea where the currents are coming in in the tide in different places. But you have to keep swimming, and you have to keep believing
Yeah.
that you're going across the current and that you will get to the other side.
Something that I find interesting is that you seem to have a lot of self-confidence that you'll be okay, or that every time you take a new leap and do something that most people would oh my God, you take a leap and you do something that most people would be very terrified of doing, of starting all over in a brand new place where you don't know anyone in the place, you don't know what you're doing, you don't have like a concrete plan. You seem to have a lot of self-confidence that no matter what will happen, I'll still be okay and I'll thrive in the end. What gives you that self-confidence, or what makes it so that you're able to take on any challenge unfazed, or not now, I don't want to say unfazed because you're able to take on any challenge and still be very confident that you will end up on the right side of the path.
Well, that's lovely. Thank you for that. I mean, I think that I appreciate the compliment. I did a post a little while ago on LinkedIn that had thousands of impressions where I talked about midnight nightmares and, about how we wake up in the morning, those of us in our 50s that have been around the world, done things and come back and gone, well, what am I doing next? What have I done right? And what am I going to do next? Um, I think that this idea that it'll be all right starts with your definition of what's all right. I think that one of the challenges that we face, and I think maybe your generation faces because you have social media, but we had it as well, but in different forms, is
Not the intensity though, nowhere near the same intensity.
no, no. I think what where that lies is in expectation and expectation management. So, one of the things I did is I took some time out. I went to India, right? So after running my PR business for a while,
Shout out India.
you shout out India, right? So I went to India and I spent some time. I'd run my PR firm for a decade. It was going well. I was making money. And but I went to India. My mother was there as well with her partner at the time. And I had achieved a lot financially, but I think what we also realized was that we know that doesn't bring happiness, right? And
Yeah.
so one of the things that I think is really important for me is knowing that actually when I say I'm going to be all right, it's that I'm going to be healthy and that I'm going to do good and I'm going to be grateful, right? So I have these three elements that I repeat for myself in the morning, right? So it's not I'm going to be rich, it's not I'm going to be famous, it's not going to be that everyone likes me, it's not going to be da da da, right? It's none of those external things that are out of my control that I would define as being success. So I think if we define success as I'm having this or I'm there or right, and these things are actually all out of our control, that creates
Yeah.
this huge stress. But if you say, you know what, I'm going to be very happy sitting in nature, maybe with my dog Binky, with a friend or on my own, and experiencing nature and being grateful for being alive, then actually it's not a very high bar, Rohan, right? Because
Yeah.
God gave me that anyway, and or whoever you believe in, we're all given the most amazing gift in the world, which is life. And so if you focus in on what you've been given rather than what you hope to attain, and then think about what you're doing this for. And for me, I want to challenge, I want to learn, but I can then serve and I can help others. Then that's very nourishing, right? So why not feel confident? Because actually God's given me these, my health and nature to enjoy it in. So as long as I've got those things, then that is success. Do you see
Mm.
what I mean? So I think what
That's
happens is we create
that's
this
honestly really
huge
eye.
expectation that success will be a Lamborghini. And I've driven a sports car and I've had a big house, but I can tell you that people that get it, and you see the number of people that commit suicide that have got everything superficially, but internally they don't have it. So surrounding myself with people that I love, doing things, that for me is important. So I have my dog, I have the cat, I feed the birds, I pick up litter on the side of the street. I think that if our goal is to enjoy and to serve rather than to achieve and to take, right? What happens is the universe then gives things back to you. You do get the friendships, you do get the love, you do get the success, because those are fundamentally good purposes to have, Rohan. So I hope that helps. So it's not that I'm imbued with any sort of sense of, innate confidence, and I have, like everybody, nights like wake up going, oh, what am I doing? And you have to work through that. But I also remind myself that, if I'm healthy and I'm doing good and that I'm grateful for what I've got, not complain about what I haven't got, then that for me has proven to be a really good framework for working through the challenges. Does that help at all? Does that sound like the ramblings of a mad old man?
That's extremely eye-opening, because one thing that I realized about social media is that the expectations are very much superficial, where you see the posts with the most likes, or the people with supercars, Ferraris, the money, the women, like all that kind of stuff. And something that you pointed out that I honestly found really eye-opening, that I have really heard from a lot of people, is that those type of things are so superficial and external. And you always hear people say, money doesn't buy happiness, but you never really believe it, because it's the rich people telling you that. And how are they supposed to know? Because they're already rich. But with what you're saying, of the things that you should be striving towards are not the cars, the money, the mansion. That's the destination. You should be striving for that journey of being great, of helping people, of all these things. And if the destination is that of the money, the world, whatever, then so be it. But the destination is you being in nature, the book, and the dog. That's also so very achievable and also very motivating to get. And that's extremely eye-opening. I really hope everyone listening to this takes that point and really internalizes it, because that is extremely powerful. Because it's so accurate, because you always see on social media these people with like all this stuff, and they're smiling, you naturally associate that with success. But that's not success. I guess it's a byproduct of helping people and being a good person, which I seriously thank you for saying that. Like, that's really, really cool.
Right. I'm glad I can help you with that, and share that insight. Now, I've had money, right, and found that it made me no happier, right? So, and also many of these people that got money, I hate to break it to you, but often the richest people are the most avaricious, right? It's not always the
What does that
case.
word mean?
They're the most self-centered. They're the most interested in themselves. They're the
Like
most. They're the people
narcissistic?
narcissistic, but also they're also people that always are on the take, always looking to get things for themselves. Because actually, many of the great people in this world that you don't necessarily think about, the Nelson Mandelas, the Mother Teresas, for example,
Yeah.
the Dalai Lama. You don't see the Dalai Lama walking around with a Lamborghini, right?
No.
So many of the great people in our societies, they're not showing trappings of consumer
Yeah.
acquisition, right? They have people who adore them for the way they made them feel or what they did. If you think of Martin Luther King, he wasn't wandering around going, "Hey, I got a Rolex. I'm happy." He's like, so
Yeah.
if you judge, if you look at the role models that you have, and maybe this is another key point, is to look at the role models that you have, and all those things that are free and available to you, a hug from a friend, a call with a parent, going for a walk or to the gym, is having a good sweat. Those are free, right? Those are all absolutely free. And those are the ones that really release the endorphins, right? Because actually, physiologically, those are the things that your body really needs, society really needs to be giving. So look, I'm really you asked me at the beginning why I came on the show. And, one of the reasons is because I hear so many young people really struggling with looking at life through the lens of social media, including my own daughters, right? And I've been lucky enough to have walked many, many miles and sat in many, many places. And on the other side of that journey, hoping to share with you that, the reality isn't on the screen, right?
Mhm.
It's actually off the screen. It's around you, and it's about going out and enjoying it and
Yeah,
embracing it, and not living someone else's life by pressing a button and giving them likes, which is,
yeah,
because that's not actually getting your life any better.
no, no. So why do you think so many people, since you're very close to it with your daughters, why do you think so many people, in a way, are addicted to that lifestyle of the money, the cars, and whatever, whatever? Why do people in general associate that with success instead of focusing on people that you listed earlier, like Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King? Because whenever you think of someone successful, you think of people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. You don't think of MLK or like Abraham Lincoln. Like you don't think of those type of people. You naturally associate the money and the cars with success instead of the real impact, the success. Why do you think we make that mistake so often?
Because the companies that run the media companies that make the money from people that are online uh, make money from selling your stuff, right?
But
It's
even like with like even if you focus on like the likes or the followers that these type of people attain, like Elon Musk has millions upon millions upon even I wouldn't put billions of followers past it. But if you look at like if MLK were to exist today, he would have like maybe 1 million followers, like nowhere near the level of Elon Musk. And are you saying that that's because of the social media companies, or is there something within us that is internally biased towards those type of people?
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things. One is that if you're one of Elon Musk's children, one of his daughters, you may not be as happy, right? So
Yeah,
there's this hero worship, but actually, when you look at the people that are being worshipped, many of them wouldn't pass the test in terms of being, responsible fathers. For example, Boris Johnson's
really.
another
I
case,
didn't know
right?
that. Wow.
Yeah, Boris Johnson's, I think it's 6 or 8 kids from 3 or 4 different women, right? So if you look at Elon Musk's marital record or look at Donald Trump, right?
Yeah,
Is he a good man? He has likes, but if you look at what he does to women or what he does to other people, creditors and so on, there has been this sort of separation between what is a sort of a sense of morality and what is a fandom, right? So people are
hmm,
supporting these people almost in spite of the characteristics that these
yeah,
people display, right, and their personalities. But I think it's very appealing, and part of it is about escapism, right? Because what happens is if these people have what we perceive to be the trappings of success, money, cars, jets, and so on, the media has told us that those things are what will make us feel better because the people who are paying for the media are the people who make the jets, make the cars,
yeah.
right?
Like the
There
Washington
is,
Post, owned by Elon, like owned by Jeff Bezos, like that type of thing.
yeah, there is no money in you going for a walk, right? There is no money in you
Yeah,
giving your dad a hug,
yeah,
right? Okay. So you have to remember that our society is driven by the, and the media businesses are driven by the people that fund those, and they create a very alluring image of what reality will look like. The other side is it is so much easier to give someone a social media like, which takes no real effort, than to have an awkward conversation with a person that you may or may not like that much. Because real relationships, real physical exercise, real self challenge is not as easy as pressing a social media like, right?
mm.
So you want to go
He's
and talk to your dad and say, Dad, I'm a bit pissed off because you didn't do this. You're my dad, but you may have to have an awkward conversation to rebuild that relationship, right?
yeah,
So what happens is it becomes easier and easier to avoid these situations. It's easier to watch TV and do a game on the TV than it is to put some gym sweats on and have a workout,
definitely.
right? So I'm afraid my view is that we get sort of enticed really into a scenario where it's easy and we get the dopamine hits from the likes and so on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that keeps us dependent, just like a drug addict, really, right? The problem with that is that it becomes a bit of a slide. It does become a slide because if you don't build a relationship with your parents or your girlfriend, right? If you don't, or your mates, if you don't do exercise, ultimately you don't have relationships. Ultimately, you don't have children. Ultimately, you don't have someone to care for you. Ultimately, you don't stay fit and healthy. Your health will deteriorate. So the long-term effects of not pulling back and getting back into the real world are really dangerous. And, that's why, one of the things I'm concerned about looking at young people is that, and we hear about the depression, we hear at my age, we hear about the depression, suicides, and the anxiety of the young. And I think it's beholden on people my generation to say, we're here, we understand what you're going through, but here are some alternative realities. Here's some things to think about to break the cycle.
Yeah.
To turn off. And it's great, Ryan, that you're a young man who's reaching out to people like me, reaching across geography and generations and saying, what can we learn? What could we do differently?
Yeah.
Then I think that's a real credit to you that you're doing that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
One thing,
absolutely.
I don't want to give too much of your time. The last question I really have is to all the people that are watching right now, since the demographic is usually people between like 16 to 24, like that type of age range. What would be your blueprint to give them of how to achieve the type of success that you have right now? Like, what would be the key things that they should keep in mind or reflect about or think about during these ages
Yeah.
that could get them to the level that you're at? What would you tell them?
Okay. Well, I think first of all, thank you. I'm flattered that you think I'm at a certain level, and I think therein lies part of the answer. I think first of all, just have a think about what success really means, because there is no point in setting off on a journey without having some kind of destination in mind,
Mm-hmm.
and also deciding what kind of route you want to take on that journey. Because if you don't know where you're going and you just go there in a hurry, then that could be quite an inconvenient and uncomfortable trip. So I think first of all, I would just encourage people, anyone listening or watching, to just take stock and look around. And first of all, think, well, where do you want to be? What will make you happy? And not let society determine that for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Look at some of the people that you can admire and see how they live their lives on their own terms. And just ask yourself, what sort of things will really sustain you emotionally over time? Is it
Mm-hmm.
a sport? Is it an art? Is it a music? Is it a relationship? Right? Is it a place? So that the goal is not acquisition of things, because those things are temporal and they will not, I can tell you, bring you sustained happiness. So first of all is, I think about what it is that will make you happy. Now, you may not know what it is that makes you really happy yet, but you will know what doesn't make you happy, what makes you anxious, the people you like to hang with, the places you
Yeah.
like to go,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that'd be the first thing. I think the second thing is to not put pressure on yourself to accomplish too much too soon, because one of the challenges seems to be that certainly on social media, there's a lot of, I made this much money by this age,
Yeah,
right? And that,
there's a lot of that. There's a lot of
yeah,
people who are saying $1 million by 18 years old, like that type of thing.
yeah. In reality, that's rare, okay? And you don't know the backstory to that, because actually what happens is we compare their success, but what we don't do is compare their situation, right? So we compare their success, go, I'd like to have that. But what we don't know is how they started, right? We don't know
Mm-hmm.
what lucky breaks they got. We don't know what money they had to start with, right? So you have to be really careful not to compare yourself, because actually, if you start off in the same place with the same assets and the same opportunity, you might do that. But no two people have the same setup. So just be
Yeah.
wary of not judging your success by the success of other people. And, you know, your generation will live on average till you're 100, right? My dad's
Definitely.
90, right? Um, and, you know, I'm probably going to live till I'm late 90s if I'm lucky, right? So, you know, you have another 80 years. So, you know, at 18, you've got at least another 80 years. So I'd say don't be in a rush. Really take time to have the experiences that the world is offering you without worrying so much about it being by a certain date.
Mhm.
And then the final thing is ignore other people, you know. And you asked about, you know, when people said, how are you going to do that and stuff like that. And of course, people said, oh, you're going to go to Singapore, you don't know anyone, you've never run a business, you know, that's insane, you'll fail and so on, right? So for sure they did. But I think if you've done that work about what makes you happy and what drives you and what your own success looks like, then when those other people say those things to you, you can say, well, that's fine. For you, that wouldn't be your definition of success. So that's your view. You're welcome to that. But this is my journey. And have the self-confidence to be on your own path
Mhm.
and to take the time to enjoy that path. Because, you know, you really have so many opportunities to create interesting things.
Yeah.
And internet makes it so much quicker to create things and scale things if you want to connect with people. So to summarize that, one is think about what would success look like for you. And I really suggest that it's not monetary and it's not things, it's how you feel, what makes you feel good. Second is to think about the kind of journey that you'd like to be on. And the third thing is not to let other people transpose their anxieties and their expectations onto you, because actually they're quite often annoyed or anxious if someone isn't doing what they're doing. They're like, then I have to question my own route, my own path, my own goals.
Yeah.
So beware of people doing that, and just believe that ultimately, you know, you can find happiness and success on your own terms.
It's kind of funny how different of a perspective you have compared to some of the previous people that I've talked to.
Oh, how
Because a lot of the
interesting. Yeah,
previous,
what have they said?
like a lot of the previous people that I talked to, or that I haven't released episodes yet, they're very hardcore business folks. People who made like hundreds of millions of dollars. Even one had a billion at some point. And it's interesting how your perspective is so much more focused on the happiness of the person versus their monetary status or social economic status. And it's interesting because you seem to be much more happier and much more content with your life and eager towards the future than someone who, let's say, has so much money now, but the fact that they have the fear of being poor pushes them to like hurt them, like I guess lose sleep, have a bad diet, not go to the gym as often. But they have the cars, they have the money, they have whatever, whatever. It's interesting how much of a different perspective you have and how your focus on life is on the happiness of the individual instead of their artificial and superficial statuses or titles or whatnot. Which I
Well, that's
find very,
interesting.
very interesting, honestly eye-opening because I think in modern society we value the shock factor of money and cars and whatnot, but we underestimate or we underappreciate how much a nice conversation or how much good like partners like that. Those type of things are very much underappreciated. And I just want to thank you because seriously, that's a very different and unique opinion and perspective that I think needs more coverage in today's like hyper fixated and super overstimulated society. I think that's really, really impressive. Thank you.
Well, Ron, thanks. And you know, I'm kind of surprised that it is a slightly contrarian view because I guess the thought is that when people attain success, they also attain some more self-awareness about what makes them happy.
Mhm.
Uh,
I think it's the opposite, honestly. I think the people who are always at the top are like dealing. I think when you have like when you get to the point where it's hundreds of millions or billions, you could either take a path of hyperfixating on monetary status, or you could take a path of, I guess, satisfaction. And there's like a lot of figures out there, like one, for example, is Andrew Tate, who I guess pushes the idea of um getting as much money as possible, becoming rich, having as many women as possible, like those type of things, which are so artificial and superficial, but yet we subscribe to those ideologies because we're told from a young age that's what makes you happy. The bigger your house is, the more happy you will be. The more wives you have, the more happy you will be. When in reality, it's like it's so much different than what people think.
Yeah, well, and the people selling that dream are the people selling you the shit that you buy to have that dream, right? So you have to remember
Yeah,
that
it's
ultimately,
exactly that.
ultimately, it's a, you're part of a machine there that's selling you stuff that ultimately helps other people make money. But if you look at suicides of superstars, right? And Coco Lee just killed herself, right? And um, whether it's George Michael, for example, right? It, the learnings in society are that these people that become super, super rich and successful are not necessarily super happy. And, you see the number of divorces and the estranged children, or, the Elvis Presleys of this world, you know. So there are lots of signs, actually, if we're
yeah.
willing to look at them. And so it's not that I'm a siren voice. I just think if you look at what happens to some of these people, like Andrew Tate's now being locked up. I mean, so he's always got some issues where he needs to prove his masculinity. But look at the emotional harm he caused to so many people, you know. And so the equation of money to, doing good just doesn't balance right for me. I mean, he's just left bad karma. And I can't imagine his mum and dad are proud of him. I can't imagine he doesn't have any children, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, if we look at the people that we are inspired by, for me anyway, those are the people that enjoy life, right? And that are healthy and have good relationships. And so, that for me just seems like a kind of an obvious path.
Yeah.
Um, and I've been very lucky. I had a lot of money, and came home and fed the cat, and I was alone. And I was like, so it actually doesn't work.
Hmm.
It's a lie. It doesn't mean happiness. Um, so I think what's wonderful is that you are raising this, and it's interesting that you've had conversations with people that are, yeah, they've made lots of money. Most people have made lots of money are worried about losing it, right?
Yes. Oh my God, that's so
And
true.
will
The
people
idea of
like
losing is
me if
scary.
I don't have the money? Will people like me still? And do they only like me for the money, right?
Yeah.
So my grandfather was an amazing man on both sides, but on my dad's side, on my dad's side, he was a missionary in Africa. On my mother's side, he was a man who fought in the war, and he won medals that he didn't tell anybody about until after he died. And he used to just say, always try and leave somewhere better than you found it.
Mm.
you know, and he was a great man, and he cared for people. And when he died, people came from all over the world to pay their respects. He was not was a humble man. He just worked in the bank, but he helped so many people during the war and after the war and so on. That there
Yeah.
was one small announcement in the Times newspaper that he had passed away, and the whole village was flooded
Really,
with
that's really
with
cool.
with love and
Yeah.
admiration and affection. And there are many billionaires that have been buried alone,
Yeah, definitely.
right? So I think that's telling us something, Rohan. And I hope that this conversation helps maybe one or two people have confidence that, look back to when you were a child. You might have liked the big gift, the new bike, but probably what you really loved was a hug from your grandma, or your dad or mum turning up to watch you perform at a sports day,
Yeah.
right? The clues are there to what makes us happy. Just encourage people not to ignore them in pursuit of what's on the screen.
Mm. I think that's a very powerful message to end on. And I really want to thank you for your time. Seriously, I really, really appreciate it.
Right. Thank
Um,
you for
I
inviting me
hope
to
that everyone
share.
listening to this like learns because I think this is one of the more interesting and more fascinating conversations that I've had, even off the podcast idea. So seriously, Mr. Seriously, James, I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so, so much. And yeah, seriously, I really appreciate
Ryan, thank you. And look, we've got matching caps, and I must get you one of
it.
these. The Unnoticed Entrepreneur. If anyone wants to reach out, jimajames.com. And I've also just written a book called Gap Your Cash, which is a book. If you go to gapyourcash.com and there's a free download. It's also just going to Amazon.
Yeah,
And
I'll link it in the description to this video.
thank you. What I've done is I've written a book. It's only 180 pages of business model ideas. So, going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation about how I made money as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old, and a 21-year-old. Listen to people like yourself who are thinking, how do I get money, legally and not by the hour?
Legally.
Yeah, so I've written a book, and it's got it explains how money's made, very simple terms, and I've also included case studies, and I've also included like cash flow and business models and templates for like writing a sponsorship letter, writing a press release, and lists of like what I call internet gold mines, places where you can buy and sell things and stuff like that. So Gap Year Cash is a project that I've started because I'd like to try and help young people to see some future that's not so dark, and to learn maybe a bit back to the future. Some of these principles are timeless. Adding value, leaving people better than when they met you, those are timeless. And the Gap Year Cash book gives people specific ideas of how to make money more quickly than working by the hour. So Rohan, I'd love it if we can share that with your community too.
Of course. Now I'm going to be buying two things from you. So the hat and then the book. All right. Well, thank you guys for watching. And another episode coming out tomorrow. Thank you everyone, and see you.